Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So I know I'm a day early with the market update, but I was just really curious to see what is happening in the trucking industry and with the data and if there are any sizable changes. So as always, let's dive into what is changing in the general market: volumes, rejections, capacity, and diesel prices. And then we'll take a close look at what is happening on the spot market for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds. Ready? Let's go. The charts are going to be attached right here, and this is the general overview, which is a mix of what is happening in the general market as well as the spot market. Now, what you will see is that the first two rows are marked with a TW and the other two rows are LW. So the first two rows is as of this week. The data is as of this week, right? General volume, how many loads exist in the general market. That number increased week over week by 17%. So volume in the general market is going up. Rejections actually went down, but ever so slightly, by less than 1% week over week, and are currently at 6.73%. Now, in terms of the spot market, this is last week's data, which means that we're looking into what happened last week, right? Not this week. So week over week, volumes on the spot market for all equipment types went down by about 14%. And in terms of the spot rates, there was pretty much no change. Time for the diesel prices, and I make these maps using AAA fuel data. So this is the price at the pump, and nothing really changes here. As you can see, the West Coast is horrific, the Northeast is bad, and Texas, Oklahoma are the cheapest, between $3 to $3.10 per gallon on average. Of course, you're going to find some places that sell fuel for higher, some for lower. Now, the curious thing is what happens to these prices when you remove IFTA to see the raw diesel price. Illinois is always the cheapest, between $2.70 to $2.80 per gallon. And then you can see that, yeah, if you are in the middle of the United States, you are probably seeing cheaper raw fuel prices. But in the West Coast as well as the Northeast, it's still very expensive. Speaking of diesel, let's take a look at what's happening in the general market. So generally speaking, we have good news, right? Week over week, diesel prices went down on average by around 2 cents per gallon nationally. Month over month, they're down 3 cents, and year over year, down 33 cents per gallon. Yeah, diesel prices are going down. I have been reading about it, and actually FreightWaves recently released an article that diesel prices, the benchmark, has hit the lowest point since, I forgot what month, but 2021. So that's good. That's good. All right, capacity. So here we take a look at what is the net change in capacity, and the way it is measured is by looking at how many companies are opened, how many MCs are opened versus how many MCs are shut down, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So the white line is as close to zero, which means there is no real change, no net change. And for the first time in a very long time, since February 21st or so, we see a significant negative net change in capacity. So week over week, we saw a net change of 173 carriers lost. All right, now let's go into specifics on the spot market, and we're going to start with dry vans. And again, as a reminder, this is data from last week, right? So when we're comparing week over week, we're comparing last week to the week before last week. So week ending on May 30th, this data is by FTR Intel. So week over week, dry vans saw a 1 cent decrease on the spot market. $1.94 is the average per mile right now. Year over year, rates are about 1% higher. Volumes dropped 14% week over week, and year over year, they're 16% lower. So far, not the best data for dry vans. Let's take a look at some maps I create using truck stop data. So these are the loads, and this is as of this week. So the maps are as of this week, right now. The lighter it is, the less loads come out of the area. And as you can see, the most loads for dry vans on the spot market come out of Texas. And then if we just take a step back, it's the Midwest and the Southeast that has more loads for those dry vans. Okay, load to truck ratios. Okay, before I tell you what I noticed, anything a shade of red is over capacity. It's just the lighter the shade of red, the less over capacity it is. Anything yellow is equilibrium between 1 to 2 loads per truck. But in this case, what I noticed is there is no area that has over 2 loads per truck for dry vans. The maximum is 1.94 loads per truck, and that occurs in Alabama. So let's take a look, because some people really get puzzled by this because they look at this map and it looks like, okay, Nevada, for example, has equilibrium, but I can't find anything. Well, the question is, where do you want to go from Nevada? So let's take a look at Montgomery, Alabama, which is the highest load to truck ratio for dry vans right now, 1.94 loads per truck. And let's take a look at how it pays and where it goes. Now, what you're about to see is you're going to see a map with a lot of lines there. Forget the lines. These are loads originating within 150 miles from Montgomery, Alabama for dry vans on the spot market. Any red state means that the loads on average from Montgomery, Alabama pay between 0 to 1.68 per mile. Any orange state, you will see, for example, Colorado is orange, is between 1.69 cents to $2.52 per mile. Anything yellow is $2.53 to $3.10, and anything green, any state that is green, pays $3.11. It's going to be hard to see, but you will see that as soon as you get to Montgomery, Alabama, where you cannot go is the West Coast or take a very long load, because you're going to earn a crap rate per mile. In order to earn like the $3.11 or more, you have to go either very short runs in Alabama, Mississippi, or whatnot, or to West Virginia, sometimes New Hampshire. So let's take a look. All right, next thing we have is reefers on the spot market. Reefers took a beating on the week ending on May 30th. So reefers saw a decrease of 13 cents per mile on average on the spot market, bringing them to $2.31. Year over year, rates are down 6%. Volumes dropped like crazy by almost 27% week over week on the spot market, and are 29% lower than this time last year. So let's take a look at the load maps, which show us the situation right now this week. So as you can see, most of the loads come from either Texas or California, but also some in Georgia, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Plain states and the Pacific Northwest are places you really don't want to be. There are no loads there. So what about load to truck ratios? So again, anything a shade of red is over capacity. You can see Washington, Oregon, and Maine are probably the worst, as well as New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Anything yellow is equilibrium, 1 to 2 loads per truck. Then we have 2 to 3 loads per truck in Iowa and 3 to 4 loads per truck in Idaho and South Dakota. So I'm going to do the same thing again from Pierre, South Dakota, because that is the one with the highest load to truck ratio at the moment. And the load to truck ratio there is 3.4 loads per truck. Let's take a look at what is happening. Again, pay attention to the colors on the map. There's going to be a key there, but also pay attention to how many loads there are for reefers going out of that place. And the way you figure that out is how many lines, how many destinations do you see? Last but not least, we have flatbeds, and flatbeds have a little bit better data, I suppose. They actually saw an increase of 3 cents per mile on the spot market week over week on the week ending on May 30th. Year over year, rates are 3% higher, but volumes, in terms of volumes, it's a mess. Week over week, they saw a decrease of almost 21% in volume on the spot market, and that's 6.5% lower than this time last year. All right, what's going on with those loads? So as you can see, I have some extra colors here because I ran out of colors, out of shades of gray. Yeah, you can see that the plain states, especially the northern plain states, not a good place to be. Neither is the northeast. The best places to be for flatbeds in terms of load volume is Alabama with over 9,600 loads, Texas with over 9,300 loads, and Arkansas, 6,216 loads. But in general, the darker an area, the more loads there are. Midwest, South, Southeast, as always. Load to truck ratios. We can see that the northern part of the US, pretty much across the board, is over capacity, unfortunately, with the exception of Oregon and Washington. But we'll talk about Oregon in just a minute. Best places to be are Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, and Louisiana. This has always been the case regardless of which month it is. This is the place where there is a higher load to truck ratio, with Mississippi seeing 11 loads per truck. Again, I want to show you a map from this time also Montgomery, Alabama for flatbeds, because it's one of those places that has a pretty high load to truck ratio with 5.18 loads per truck, give or take. So I want you to look at this. And again, take a look at the keys, see how much those rates pay. Again, if you see, for example, a red state, that means it pays below $2.29 per mile. But yeah, take a look at where the loads are actually going, how much they pay, and what you will really quickly realize is that the longer the load, the less it pays, and there are almost no long loads from Alabama, despite it being one of the best places for flatbeds. So go ahead and take a look. Now, to top it off, I wanted to talk about Oregon, because Oregon looks like a place with undercapacity. There are way more loads than there are trucks there. So I always say, be careful with Oregon, and I'm going to show you exactly why that is. I'm attaching it right here. What do you see here? First of all, you see a crap ton of loads. They go all over the United States. But something you will see is that the loads that pay $2.37 or more are going to dead areas. This is Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, etc. The moment you start going further east, or south, God forbid, you are facing less than $1.48 or definitely less than $2 per mile. So Oregon, yes, it is a place with undercapacity. There are just not enough trucks to pick up those loads. But it doesn't mean you're going to get to a good area. It means you're going to go to a completely dead area. So please be careful with Oregon, regardless of what equipment type you have. Dry van, reefer, or flatbed. All right, so a few things that are happening in the market right now. Number one, we see that this week volumes have increased in the general market. Rejections have not fallen that much, which means we should probably, hopefully, see those volumes increase on the spot market as well within 1 to 2 weeks, considering that volumes and rejections are still more or less higher, right, in the general market. However, something we saw is that last week there were definitely not a lot of positive changes on the spot market for the three equipment types. Flatbeds were doing a little bit better, but volume fell across the board. Another thing we learned is that a good market with a higher load to truck ratio does not always mean that this is a good market for you. Oregon, for example, as I said, is not a good market for flatbeds. Neither is Washington, neither is any of the West Coast. A good market for a flatbed is the South: Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. The same thing applies to reefers and dry vans. So always be careful about where you go and take a deep dive into the place you are delivering to, because looking at it just surface level is going to give you an illusion that, hey, I'm going to a good market, and then you get there and you're like, oops. Now, what I'm super curious about is what will happen this month with the data, because as a reminder, June 25th is when the English proficiency starts being an out of service order. So I'm very curious to see how the data reacts a little bit before and of course after June 25th. Will there be a change in capacity? Will there be an increase in those spot rates? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week and weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.